Hey everybody, welcome to the Bible ReThink. My name is Kenny Panis, and I am very delighted that you joined me. So we are continuing our series called Why Does the Bible Say That? Choosing topics, something to talk about. Today is going to be more than a theological curiosity though. We're actually going to be talking about a cultural talking point. So I invite you to join me as I talk about aliens, UFOs, and of course what the Bible says. So I saw the movie Disclosure Day, and I really liked it. I really liked the contrast there. There were two nuns, one who's a young woman who left the church. So she's a former novice. Her name is Jane. And her mentor is Sister Mara, still in the monastery. So they had the same training. They served the same God. But they had opposite fears when it came to the issue of disclosure. Jane, who left the religious life, she was actually terrified that if the world found out about extraterrestrial beings and UAPs, it would rock their world, shatter their belief system. Sister Mara, on the other hand, she stayed in the monastery, but she wasn't afraid. And so that's what made the movie interesting, this twist here where the one that was the most afraid was the one that actually left the faith. The one who was at peace the most remained. So it brings me to a question as we're dialoguing about this topic is, what can our faith actually survive? What do you think? Do you think your faith will survive if you found out all of a sudden that there are extraterrestrial beings here? Or would you call it a day? A lot of Christians are struggling with that. So again, that's another reason why we got to talk about it. Because we just don't pretend it's not there. Let's talk about it. Because right now, that question is not really a hypothetical one. It's an actual headline because of what's been happening around our culture and the conversations. So earlier this year, former President Obama had a podcast. It was a casual interview. It was one of those speed round things. And someone asked him point blank, are aliens real? And Obama looked at them, had a cup of coffee. They're real, but I haven't seen them. He also dismissed Area 51 as being this underground facility that houses such people. Well, word got back to Trump when he was on Air Force One, and the reporters told him that Obama said aliens are real. And all Trump could say was, hey, he's given out classified information. It's a mistake. And then a few hours later, Trump posted on his social media that he was directing the government agencies to begin the process of releasing files of alien and extraterrestrial life. You can't make this up. It's so hilarious to me. He's releasing unsealed UAP files, aliens and extraterrestrial beings. He's releasing them. That's decades of classified material, congressional hearings, whistleblowers that are under oath. And the prevailing question is this: do the people have a right to know? Should this be public knowledge or just really limited to the government? And then people really got specific. This conversation has started talking about the disclosures and naming names and describing what some of these extraterrestrial beings actually look like. And so Dr. Eric Davis, a PhD in astrophysics, who spent years as a consultant to classified Pentagon UAP programs, he actually named 4 categories at a closed congressional briefing in 2024. He said, there are 4 types of beings that we know. The Greys. These are small. They're 3 feet to 4. They have large black eyes. I always think that's where Spider-Man got his look. They're the primary abductors in encounter accounts and in the movies. And they are very clinical, emotionless, no verbal communication. And here's the hard part is they experiment on you and they poke you and they cause you some pain and trepidation. But since they don't talk, they don't explain. And if you've listened to some abduction claimers, those memories still haunt them. There's also the Nordics. They're human appearing. They have light hair. They have really light skin. And Davis said that they were about 5 foot to 6 feet tall. But there are other accounts that actually push that number to 6'5" to 7 feet. They're often described as less threatening. They're more communicative. They're friendly face of the 4. And so think Superman coming from Krypton, Kal-El, how he blends in Kansas and part of the culture, and he looks human. There's also the scary ones, the reptilians. They are 6 to 8 feet, according to Davis. They have lizard-like features, scaly skin, and they're physically imposing, cold and dominant in encounter accounts. Now, this is off the record, but the Bible has a category for powerful, deceptive, serpentine beings. I'm not saying these are the same things, but the Bible has a category for that person as well. And then lastly, there's the insectoids. These are the tallest, between 7 to 9 feet. They look like praying mantises. And though this is not specifically in Davis's transcript, there's been abduction research that consistently links them to the ones that are actually in command. They're in charge. They're the supervisors and the overseers. And the smaller beings are the ones that do the work, so they watch. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's so engaging. It's so interesting as people start talking about this. So is this going to be the great deception? It's possible. I never want to say nothing can be. But before we panic, before we sensationalize, I think we need to dig beneath the surface. Look at the Bible. What does the scripture have to say? Because I'm here to tell you that the Bible doesn't tell you you have to wait till 2026 to find out there is intelligent non-human beings in existence. The Bible has been proclaiming that from the very beginning. But people look at it and go like, that's just the Bible. It's not real. But the more you study the Bible, the more you begin to realize that what's going on is something that the Bible always said was happening. So the Bible is filled with non-human intelligence. I mean, it's all over the place, and it starts in page 1, and then it ends in the last page where there's this heavenly family back together again. So Colossians 1:16, it's a good verse. For by him all things were created. There's a stress in all things, both in the heavens and on earth. So the heavens includes the atmosphere, the universe, whether they're visible or invisible. And that's one of the primary problems that we have with the talk about aliens and the talk about spiritual beings is that we haven't really seen them. We've heard about them, but we haven't really seen them because it's a different kind of I don't know how to say it, but our senses cannot pick it up if they are here. So I continue. So whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Remember when I told you that the Bible has always proclaimed there are spiritual beings that are intelligent, in many cases far more intelligent than humans? Well, Paul just listed 4 classifications of them. And he starts at the top. There's the thrones. Doesn't need very much explanation. The dominions, the rulers, and the authorities. This is Paul's cosmology. He's describing a spiritual realm that is really well organized. There's also in the Hebrew Bible the divine council. And these are councils where God presides over an assembly of spiritual beings. And the results are usually getting input, assignments, sometimes it's even judgment. So if you know the book of Job, you know about one of these divine councils, where the Satan, or as many people like to call him now, Satan, was present in the assembly. And of course, God said the thing we dread hearing, have you considered my servant Job? Anyway, we know how that went. It wasn't a good situation. But in other cases of divine councils, God is actually judging these spiritual beings. Psalm 82:1. It says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Now, it's important to understand this because many people get confused here. The term for gods is Ben Elohim. It's just a general term. It's not like Yahweh. It's a general term that refers to spiritual beings. And so even Christians knew that there are spiritual beings in the world, but when you see the translators put gods there, they start to think this is equal with God. No, these are created beings. These are spiritual beings. And check out the punishment they get for the wickedness, because what happens here is that God actually gives them control over the nations. And they start ruling unjustly. They start showing partiality to the wicked, ignoring the poor and the fatherless, a whole boatload of things they do. And then in the last verse, in verse 7, there's the judgment here. Yahweh says, I said, you are gods. Again, spiritual beings, sons of the Most High. That's God himself, okay? All of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Friends, they will die like every man, okay? They're going to fall like every prince. So it's like this only makes sense if these are not men. Because, of course, men die like men. But when it comes to spiritual beings, they're created, but they don't die. And so the judgment here is that you will die like men. And it goes even further when we're talking about spiritual beings in the Bible. The most specific example of the council intersecting with earth, the most debated text in the whole conversation, is Genesis chapter 6. Let's read it. 1-4. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And look at the Lord's response here, friends. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And what that's communicating is that in 120 years, the flood is coming. So start building, Noah. And then out of nowhere, this last paragraph here talks about a group of people called the Nephilim. It says, now the Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So, friends, what we got here is three groups. There's the sons of God, there's the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. Now, it's easy to understand who the daughters of men are, right? They're the females involved in this practice. They're the ones that are being taken for what's wives. They're the ones that are producing offspring. But some people think the sons of God can't refer to spiritual beings. It must be humans. And there's two conclusions. Either they're from the godly line of Seth, or they're from powerful rulers, power warrior kings that just take wives by force. The problem with these views is that neither of them explain where the Nephilim came from. You see, the evidence actually points to spiritual beings. And here's why. I'm going to give you a list. First of all, the Hebrew. B'nai Elohim is used exclusively for divine beings. Everywhere else it appears in the Old Testament, we talked about Job, we talked about Psalm 82. They're never human. They're always spiritual beings, angels, divine beings. In fact, the oldest interpretation also sees these as spiritual beings. The earliest of the church fathers, they looked at this and they said, these are angels. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, it's known as the Septuagint, they translate sons of God as angelos, or angels. Who are the Nephilim? Friends, they're hybrid offsprings of fallen angels and human women. And they are described throughout the Bible as giants. They're mighty men, men of renown. And so the word Nephilim, it comes from Nephal, which means to fall. They were known as the fallen ones. Now they precede the flood. And it says at that time that every inclination of mankind's thoughts were evil all the time. And many of the sons of God and the Nephilim were wiped out when the flood came. But Genesis 6:4 said this, remember? And also afterward, signaling that this pattern did not fully end there, and that you have to fast forward it and you'll see him again. And this happens in Numbers 13:33. It's the time of Moses. Giants again appear. Moses sends 12 spies out to see the promised land, to find out if they can take them. Now, keep in mind, the flood happened, right? So this is over 1,087 years after the flood. So the Israelite spies, they look at these giants and they say, we're like grasshoppers here. And 10 of them, of course, give a bad report and say, hey, we cannot take these guys. Although the land is beautiful, although God promised we would, we just can't do it. So that's the narrative that's going on with this grasshopper language. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because there's an ancient Jewish text. It's becoming really the popular fad now, that fills in the rest of the story. And I know you're probably looking at me thinking like, well, that doesn't mean much. Well, maybe this does. 2 New Testament writers clearly knew this story, and they allude to it in their biblical writings that are canonical. In fact, one of them, Jude, it's a clear cut and paste. It happens in Jude 14 through 15. It was about also that these men, that Enoch in the 7th generation from Adam prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all and to convict all the ungodly of their ungodly deeds, which they have done in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Now again, you see the language here. Ungodly happens 4 times in this passage. It also says that Enoch was talking to these men. These men, friends, are the sons of God. And we'll also find out in the book of Enoch, they're called the Watchers. So Enoch is talking to these men, and he's pronouncing this prophecy that'll happen because of their ungodly ways. And Jude quotes that's 1 Enoch 1 verse 9. And he treats that as authoritative prophecy for the ungodly people in his own timeline. Now, here's the argument and the pushback you get. Well, the book of Enoch is not canonical. It's not scripture. And that's true. It's not in the Protestant, Catholic, or the Eastern Orthodox canon. It is in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. This is what's known, this material like Enoch, as Second Temple literature. And it's not bad literature. It's basically literature that's supposed to help you, in some cases, act as a kind of a commentary on a passage. So both Jude and Peter knew clearly what it said. The earliest of the manuscripts that the church found, the early codexes, also have some of these Second Temple literature books along with the canon in them. So you'll see books like the Shepherd of Hermas, and of course we talked about Enoch. The early church was very familiar with that. The disciples were familiar with it. Jesus was familiar with it. And so this book, First Enoch, it describes 200 watchers. Samuel descended down to earth with his people, and they take women, they impregnate them, and they produce Nephilim. And then later on, they are judged and imprisoned. And here's what Jude and Peter do with that. This is important. It's so cool. They lock in the verdict. Whatever those beings did, God dealt with it permanently, authoritatively. And it's just amazing. Jude verse 6. And the angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So we see it right there. They abandoned their domain. Okay, so these are sons of God that are leaving the spiritual domain, the heavenlies, and they're invading earth. You've heard that story before. Not necessarily in the Bible, but just kind of they're coming to earth and they're invading us and they're abducting us. They're taking us. It's in the Bible too. This was a capital offense, and punishment was enforced, eternal imprisonment until Jesus returns, which is known as the day of the Lord. 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, reserved for judgment. This is describing the magnitude of the punishment. They were cast into hell and they were in pits of darkness. Now, the word hell is used in a multiple ways in the scriptures. But the word that you're reading is not used as Hades or the Old Testament equivalent Sheol. It's not even used as Gehenna, where they burned and sacrificed children. And also the book of Revelation talks about the lake of fire. But hell there is the word Tartaros. It's in the Greek. And if you know Greek mythology, it's actually the deepest part of the abyss. It's the deepest part of hell. It's even underneath Hades. And the only time that this verb appears in the entire New Testament, Peter reaches for the strongest word available in the Greek language to describe the place where they are today, still waiting for that final judgment. And 1 Peter 3:19 through 20, I'm not going to read this, but I'm just going to point out the highlights here, Sports Center highlights. So Peter talks about these spirits, these angels, the spirits that are in prison. But look at this. He says, during the days of Noah. Timestamp. So important. So the same beings, the same event. This is not mythology. This is history, my friends. This is history. The Bible is recording here. But it's talking about spiritual beings, and so sometimes that makes us uncomfortable. But the Bible never held back on that. There have always been spiritual beings, intelligent, non-human people, smarter than us, way smarter than us, because they've seen things that we can't even imagine. So, which means that whatever is showing up in restricted airspaces today, it's not those original 200 sons of God and the Nephilim that died at that time. They are in Tartarus. They're not going anywhere. But remember the hierarchy, the myriads and myriads. Remember the classifications. It's vast, and not all of them are imprisoned. So whatever this is, it belongs to a category the Bible has already named. Okay, let's fast forward now to 2026. What are these things that we are seeing or observing? UAPs? Aliens? You know, the easiest possibility here is these things are earthly. Classified programs, technology that's not been cleared yet for us to see. Not everything unexplained is supernatural. It just isn't. This has been a pattern. We supernaturalize a UAP too quickly before doing investigating. I remember I was in India and I was driving to Walmart, and I seen this aircraft hover above me that looked like a rocket ship. I'm like, wow, that was a weird feeling. And then I went on the internet and found out that it was something that SpaceX was testing. And so sometimes these UAPs are just simply technology that's being tested that is not known to public. And here's an interesting fun fact, is that even the physical explanation has its own problems, the reports that people give. Hugh Ross, again, he's an astrophysicist. He notes that the right angle turns that these crafts are making, you know, the ones where they disclose this from the pilots, that they're making these 5,000 to 2,500 mile per hour turns in right angles. It's just unheard of. Who could do that? But Ross goes on to explain that it can't be a physical object because of the G-force that we have here. No physical ship survives that G-force. But not only that, when these things are discovered and seen, there's no sonic boom, there's no debris, there's no heat friction. So whatever it is, it does not behave like matter. And if it's not physical, the next logical category is something outside of matter entirely. And this is exactly the category the Bible has been describing for thousands of years. Spiritual beings, demonic beings that have access to different kinds of technology and have seen things that we've never seen before. Another theory that's been floating around there is, well, maybe these people aren't extraterrestrial after all. Maybe we're dealing with interdimensional beings. So I want to play a clip from Anna Paulina Luna, a congresswoman, and then we'll talk about this.
So when you say that it operates outside our understanding of physics, what specifically are you saying? Like what happened?
To I guess break it down in simple terms is that I think that some of the tech that exists, that whatever these things have, these energy things have,
Energy
can,
things? What do you
yeah,
mean?
well, they call them interdimensional beings. I think that they can actually operate through the time spaces that we currently have.
So Luna calls these entities interdimensional, not extraterrestrial beings. Extraterrestrial, just so you know, means they come from other planets and other galaxies in space. But Luna says we're talking about interdimensional beings. They're from a different dimension that intersects with ours, a portal, if you will. And she also points, fun fact, to the book of Enoch as a biblical precedent.
And we can go into some of the books that were removed from what we know as the modern day Bible, but I read through the book of Enoch multiple times. And I'm not saying that these things are angels. Okay, that's not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that depending on where you are in regards to your whole perspective on whether or not God exists, like I believe in God, I'm a Christian. There has to have been, and there's admissions that there was other creations that God made, but that we were the most prized creation. And so I think that this can open up a bigger topic of discussion.
I'm interested in what Luna has to say, but she somehow thinks that the book of Enoch was taken out of the Bible, implying that they were scared of these things. Well, that's not the case at all. The Orthodox Church, Catholic Church, Protestant Church, it was never accepted. The people that they relied on for the Old Testament, the Jewish folks, they never included the book of Enoch as canonical. It's not in the Tanakh. So we'll move on. But there are other encounters. I don't know why I get excited about that. There are other encounters in which you see heavenly beings that intersect with earth. You see all kinds of examples. Think about Jacob's ladder. Here's a man who's sleeping on a rock. He looks up and he sees this vision of this staircase that's coming from heaven. Angels descending and ascending, and the Lord is looking down upon him. And the message is clear. It's like, even though you might not see God or you might not see spiritual beings, they are at work serving God. Jacob is so moved by this that he names that place Bethel, which means house of God, which means you can go into the most vacant territory and all of a sudden find heaven on earth right in front of you through this encounter of intersecting dimensions. There's also the ascension of Jesus after he was raised from the dead. He spent 40 days just showing off his new look. And then he ascends to heaven right before their eyes. They see him going to heaven, another dimension. And he wasn't in a rocket ship. There's the commander of the Lord's army when Joshua's fighting Jericho and they're preparing for battle. All of a sudden, there's this commander of the Lord's army. And Joshua just wants to say, hey, whose side are you on? And the response is classic. I'm not on anybody's side, but I'm on God's side. I'm with Yahweh. Joshua liked that. Because God always said that he was going to do fighting the wars. We also have dream sequences that happen in the Bible where God just kind of reveals, sometimes prophetically, like Joseph, about what's going to happen in the future. Sometimes in a dream, someone is told, hey, don't divorce your wife because she is pregnant by the Holy Spirit. God used angels in Daniel. God uses these angels to meet people sometimes where heaven intersects with earth. Book of Revelation filled with end times visions, angelic visions, creatures, that have eyes and faces on all four corners. It's quite a show when it comes to spiritual beings and the imagination of what these would actually look like. seems to be far better than what we've seen. Disclosure Day is just simply a term that means that you're going to hear things about extraterrestrial beings, about, unidentified flying objects, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. You're going to hear more stories about that. You're going to hear people speculating. You're going to see people on social media sharing their testimony about when they were abducted. You're going to hear a lot of these things. And so it's important to know that when disclosure happens, whatever that looks like, we are called to be discerning, friends. We must test what people share. 1 John 4:1 says it like this: Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. But there's an objection, and it's the one that I hear the most from the most thoughtful people. And I think it's completely a fair argument. And on the surface level, it looks like a slam dunk. I'm talking about the cosmos. They are vaster than we ever knew they were. Today, estimates put the observable universe at about 2 trillion galaxies. And every time we build a brand new, powerful telescope, that number goes up. We see farther and farther away, and we find more and more galaxies and planets. So, if it is reasonable to assume that the odds have greatly improved for there to be life on other planets if we still continue to see more galaxies and more planets, it doesn't seem reasonable to think that the Earth, this planet here, is the only planet with intelligent life. But that assumption is about to get a serious challenge by Dr. Hugh Ross, a credentialed astrophysicist who has spent decades running the actual numbers. And what he found, it really flips this argument entirely the other way, because you have to break down what's called the habitable zone. So the habitable zone is a specific set of conditions that a planet must meet simultaneously for this to be possible. It's not just one thing. So it's not just having the right star or the right orbit or the right location in the galaxy, the right atmospheric protection from radiation. No, all of these components have to be present in the planet all at once. And if you miss even one of these, life cannot exist. Astronomers have identified 13 to 14 of these known planetary habitable zones. So think of them as overlapping rings, and the planet must sit inside all of those rings, all 13 or all 14 of them. Not some of them, not half of them, not most of them. The planet has to sit inside all of them. Astronomers have now discovered more than 6,000 planets that are beyond our solar system. And every time we build a more powerful telescope, that number continues to grow. More planets found every single year. But here's what Ross points out about that. Of those 6,000 planets, not one of them resides in even 3 of the known 13 to 14 habitable zones. Not one. And the more planets we find, the lonelier the Earth really looks. The only planet known to reside in 13 of 14 habitable zones simultaneously, you guessed it, it's the one that you're sitting on right now. The vastness of the cosmos does not improve the odds. it multiplies the evidence for Earth's uniqueness. When you multiply 13 to 14 requirements together, each one already rare in its own, the math produces a number so small that across the entire observable universe, you would expect far less than one qualifying planet by chance. I said far less than one planet by chance to be able to house life. Not even 1%. Not even 1 in a million. Less than one planet. That's your odds. Period. As far as we have been able to see now. And yet, the one that you are sitting in qualifies in all 13 to 14 of those habitable zones. Friends, and this is important for this discussion, bigness was never an issue for the Bible. Colossians 1:19 through 20, it says, "For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross." It's communicating here that this was the Father's good pleasure. All the fullness to dwell in Jesus, and for all things to be reconciled in him, whether or not they're in heaven or earth, invisible or visible. This is not merely a payment for individual sin, though that's significant. It's a cosmic victory also over the spiritual powers themselves. Colossians 2:15 says it like this: "When he had disarmed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him." It's the same language. A public display. He shamed him. This is what Colossians actually claims happened on the cross. So could aliens be a real thing? I like to say it's possible. The argument of the size of the universe, the 2 trillion galaxies and growing with telescope updates, indicates that there still is more possibility the more that we discover. But my default is, I don't think they're a real thing. I need to see proof. With all the technology that we have with cameras and telescopes and satellites, we should have clear pictures far superior to the radar footage that we see by these pilots. Because I don't think the government can hide things as much as they were able to do before. There's too much technology in this world. Too many people, even with cell phones, that have far better cameras than there has been in the existence of this planet. So I definitely believe that what people are experiencing are spiritual beings that the Bible describes. The hierarchy is bigger and stranger than most Christians realize. Myriads and myriads. That is countless. So if someone comes up to you and says, "Did you know that aliens invented Jesus?" Friends, you don't need to go to a classified briefing. You don't need to go to a private meeting with pastors and Congressman Eric Burleson. All you have to do is read Colossians 1:16. You need John 1:1 in your life. In the beginning was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then you jump down to verse 14, and the Word tabernacled among us, became flesh. It's talking about Jesus, who's been here from the very beginning and who's responsible for the creation of the world. So, remember that, friends. Jesus is bigger than the entire universe, let alone any potential alien population. And if we find them, if Disclosure Day reveals them, just remember this: He created them. In the end, Jesus is the one, not UAPs, not extraterrestrial beings. Jesus is the one who holds the universe together. He is the one. You can never doubt that. Anyway, I was pretty stoked about this video because I know the disclosure is coming. But I just want to confidently tell you that the Bible shows you all that you need. It's all there, thousands of years before 2026. I hope this was helpful. Would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on aliens, UFOs, and the Bible? Leave me a note in the comments section. I just ask you to be respectful. That's all that I ask, because it promotes good dialogue and we can sharpen each other. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening. God bless you all, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Bible ReThink. Take care.